Hi, my name's Tommy Pigott. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications at the Republican National Committee.
Hi, I'm Rachel Lee, and I'm the Deputy Director of Communications at the Republican National Committee.
Welcome to the Republican Rundown. So Election Day was Tuesday.
Yes,
Big results coming in. What are some races that stuck out to you looking at those results?
absolutely. First, I think it would be great to take a look at New York. We've been seeing Republican momentum in the state, and I'd like to start with looking at the Bronx, actually. We flipped a city council seat there.
Wow, the Bronx. That's pretty incredible. I mean, because when you think of the Bronx, you don't think Republicans winning in the Bronx traditionally.
That's right. But if you look at what's happening in New York under complete Democrat control, it's not hard to see why the tide is turning in our favor. And so that seat had actually been held for over 20 years. And we flipped that on Tuesday night.
Well, it seems to me, and maybe if you disagree with this, but it's kind of a testimony to the fact that Democrat policies are failing in New York. I mean, we see Eric Adams saying the border crisis is going to destroy that city. We see crime surging in that city. We see people leaving New York, not just New York City, but the state in general under Democrat Kathy Hochul. Do you think those are the issues why do you think we're seeing this movement towards Republicans in New York, not just the Bronx, but across the board?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not affordable to live there, and you're also having to consider the high cost of crime. And now they're facing the illegal immigrant surge, as you've mentioned, that the mayor is saying is unsustainable. Joe Biden has ignored that issue entirely, and voters are sick and tired of it. And I think that's why you see momentum in places like we have on Long Island, where we also flipped a county executive seat that had not been Republican for 20 years.
And it's not just one, right? This goes back to last election as well. So Long Island is a Republican island now, isn't it? I mean,
Well, we're certainly trending in that direction. I mean, we have a clean sweep of all 4 congressional seats on Long Island, and we're continuing to see more momentum. And you can also look at Hudson Valley, where you're seeing momentum in Dutchess County, and we have congressional seats that have flipped there as well. And so we're really excited about what's happening in New York, but I think it's just a testament to the failure that Democrats have put upon their voters year after year.
So I'm from New Jersey originally, and so New York area, the other side of New York City from us, Long Island. Great to see that GOP momentum. Well, it's also in New Jersey, right? I mean, one of the congressional districts, Tom Keene, for example, I was seeing he was posting what seemed to be a lot of victories on Tuesday night when it comes to Republicans winning in his district.
That's right. In New Jersey 7th District, where, of course, we flipped that seat from Democrat Tom Malinowski to Tom Keene just last November, we are seeing these local races that are flipping to Republican and even having full sweeps in local county governments in New Jersey. And I think that is just getting started. They've got another gubernatorial race up in a couple of years, and so they didn't have the top of the ticket. But we still saw Republicans turning out to hold Democrats accountable.
So when we're looking at the House majority, so for someone that doesn't live in New Jersey, happy to see those wins on the local level. But when we're talking about wins in a target congressional seat that Democrats might be targeting, or one that we just flipped, what can we learn from that? It would seem to me that would be a good sign for holding that seat, or at least that we have momentum heading into the election for the House representative seat come this next election.
That's right. You certainly saw in these races that are especially in target congressional districts, just money being poured in by Democrats and outside groups that weren't even from the state, of course, who are focused on gaining ground ahead of 2024. And I don't think that we saw a lot of that momentum like they were hoping for. We saw Republican policies work, and voters turned out for those policies.
It seems like if you're voting Republican in an off year, you're going to vote Republican, or hopefully that's part of the momentum we might be seeing going into the next election.
That's right. And I think another thing to point out is you saw these congressional members who are also getting out the vote. And a good example of that is Mike Lawler in New York. He campaigned and had worked hard for these races, these local races in his district. And Chairwoman McDaniel also went out and campaigned in New York and in New Jersey. And we saw great successes there with these county level races that ultimately are going to be helpful in 2024 when we return to the polls to reelect these congressmen that we flipped their seats.
So looking at other local races, one of the races I saw that we flipped, I believe, is Manchester, New Hampshire. I mean,
Yes.
Another historic victory. We flipped mayor's races in Indiana. I mean, it seems like we had a lot of victories in terms of new Republican mayors across the country.
We did. Republican mayors had a great night on Tuesday. Manchester, glad you brought that up. That's actually the largest city in New Hampshire. So this is a very significant win. We're excited about that. We saw voters rejecting those failed Democrat policies. You mentioned Indiana. We actually elected the first Black Republican mayor in Indiana state history. So that was a very exciting night for Republicans in Indiana.
Oh, great. I mean, so talked about Indiana, New York, New Hampshire. One of the states that got the most attention on Tuesday was Virginia. I was hoping you could break down a bit of what we saw in Virginia, what we can draw conclusions from in Virginia, and generally the general picture of what happened in Virginia.
Absolutely. And of course, the media is going to paint this doom and gloom, but what we need to keep in mind is that Republicans actually won every legislative seat that Joe Biden won by single digits or less. So if Joe Biden had carried a district by 9 points, a Republican won it on Tuesday night.
Oh,
and
wow.
that is huge.
Yeah, I mean, so that seems to be in direct contradiction to this narrative that Republicans didn't fare well, because it seems to be, if we're winning every single district that Joe Biden won by 9 points or less, that we're competing and we're winning in Democrat areas.
We actually gained a seat in the state Senate. People aren't talking about that. That is important to note. And I think one more thing that we should keep in mind is that we're expecting that by the time all votes are counted in Virginia, that the Democrat to Republican votes cast will be within 1 point.
Oh, wow. So we're talking about a state that Joe Biden won by 10 points, right, in the last election?
Right, right. So we know that Joe Biden did not have the night that he would have you imagine that he had. Virginia still has Republican momentum. We're excited about many of the wins that we saw, and Republicans really held their own on Tuesday night.
And I think that'd also be bad news if I was a congressional Democrat in the federal House of Representatives looking at state and House districts in my state going towards Republicans in districts Biden won by 9 points or less. That's got to be worrying for Democrats on the federal level when they're looking at this next election.
Absolutely, especially when you look at how much money was being poured into these races. So for Democrats to have fared the way they did, they outspent Republicans on TV alone by $7.5 million in the state of Virginia.
Wow.
So the outspending discrepancies there that you're seeing between the results versus what was spent, if I'm a Democrat, I'm discouraged going into 2024.
So talking about that money that was spent, another state that got a lot of attention was Mississippi. A state Democrats thought that they could compete in. They wanted to target the governor, Tate Reeves. One of the stats I saw, and correct me if this is wrong, but Democrats spent as much as Republicans did in that state and made no ground up whatsoever in terms of momentum in Mississippi. Is that right?
That's right. So Democrats actually went toe for toe with Republicans on spending in deep red Mississippi, thinking that they could gain ground. And not only did the governor get reelected comfortably, we also gained 2 seats for a House majority in Mississippi.
And one of the things about the Mississippi election, I think, I just learned on Tuesday, honestly, is that if you get less than 50% of the vote, it goes to a runoff, right? So you have to clear that 50%, not only win by a large margin, you also have to get above 50% and counting all the other votes, counting votes for whoever it is. Is that right in terms of Mississippi?
Yeah, and so we had a great night for the governor. It's clear that his policies work. And I think you see that voters are turning out for things like education results. So while other states in the country, especially blue states, were shutting down schools and test scores were dropping, Mississippi has been soaring in the last few years in student achievement, especially on those critical 4th grade tests, and just seeing that Republican policies work.
So another governor's race that was going on at the same time was Kentucky. In Kentucky, we had the Democrat winning there, but that's not really the full story of Kentucky. We had all of these victories, winning every single statewide down ballot race in Kentucky. And you were mentioning something to me earlier I thought was interesting about the number of votes, the top vote getters in Kentucky. It wasn't Andy Beshear, it was the Republican candidates.
That's right. Andy Beshear, while he walked away with victory, what people are not saying is that Republicans actually were the top vote getters in Kentucky. And it wasn't just the first top vote getter, the second, but also the third top vote getter. So 3 Republicans got more votes on, ultimately at the end of the day, than Andy Beshear did in Kentucky.
And that's because of the work that Republicans across the state put into Kentucky. So
that's right. And Republicans, the RNC invested $1 million into Kentucky and made over 1 million voter contacts. We have a very strong relationship with that state party. And Republicans have been out talking to voters every day and really putting in the work to turn out the vote.
And one thing I thought was interesting about the elections in Kentucky and Virginia, elsewhere, is that they could not run farther away from Joe Biden. That Joe Biden was nowhere to be seen Democrats were running as fast away from him as possible. So given that Democrats are running from Joe Biden, what do you think that entails or foretells for this coming presidential election cycle?
I mean, this is incredibly grim news for Joe Biden. And I will let you speak to this more, but this was a stark contrast from what we saw in previous election cycles. Joe Biden was nowhere to be found on the campaign trail. He stayed out. He endorsed in some races towards the end, but generally candidates didn't want Joe Biden near him. They knew he was toxic. Over 75% of the country know that we're on the wrong track.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that the same night that we were seeing Republicans compete and win in Biden plus 9 districts, the same night that we were seeing the first Republican elected in the Bronx in 20 years, the first, we were seeing Republicans reelected in Mississippi resoundingly. We're seeing victories across the country for Republicans. Same night that's happening, a CNN poll comes out. Over 70% of the country thinks we're on the wrong track. Over 70% of the country has doubts about Joe Biden's ability to be president of the United States. I mean, it's really a warning sign for Joe Biden when it comes to these election results and this really devastating poll we saw from CNN, I think.
Absolutely. And Joe Biden's got to be shaking in his boots at this point. I mean, what we're seeing across the country is that voters are sick and tired of his policies, especially in the last month. His numbers have just plummeted. And in states that typically you would see him, fairly holding his own, he's underwater in blue states. I think it's also important to note that when we're talking about these election results, one election that people are not talking about right now that they would be otherwise is Louisiana. And the reason they're not talking about it is because he won a 14-way primary outright.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty incredible. So by outright, over 50% of the vote.
That's right.
14-way primary, winning over 50% of the vote. And there were Democrats in that race, right?
Of course. And he flipped that seat to be a Republican governorship now in Louisiana. And that election was supposed to be, it was expected to be next weekend. But now Republicans won with such a strong result that we already have Republican Governor Jeff Landry and then his lieutenant governor, who also had a big win.
Yeah, I mean, I think people looking at this momentum that we had, these victories that we had, obviously there are a few states that we wanted to do better in terms of beating Andy Beshear, in terms of winning the state house and House delegates in Virginia, even though we competed and won in all these districts. So if you're a Republican looking at that and you're saying we were so close in a lot of these states, even though we had all these resounding victories, what would you say to those voters in terms of preparing for 2024? How do we take the momentum, take the victories we had, and make sure we're getting even more victories, even more momentum next election?
Absolutely, and that's a fantastic question. You need to start making your plan now. And so the RNC, in conjunction with state parties, have rolled out Bank Your Vote, and we would encourage you to go to bankyourvote.com, and there you'll be able to sign up to get updates, because what we're doing with Bank Your Vote is being sure that our voters know to vote before Election Day.
You know what's also, I think, incredible about that Bank Your Vote initiative is that it's not just this nationwide blanket website where it's one size fits all at all. I mean, you have state-specific pages in Ohio, right? Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. What other states? New York.
New York, that's right.
California.
That's right. And we're seeing more and more launch. We're launching more this week. We are very excited about this initiative, and it's something that the Republican ecosystem has come together on, and we are fully focused on getting out the vote early, so that regardless of if it's absentee, early voting, if you're voting by mail, however it is that you are voting before Election Day, that you make a plan and that you commit to it and then get your friends and neighbors to do the same.
And it's also in other languages, right? We're talking about a Spanish version. We're talking about other language versions that we're going to be rolling out from Bank Your Vote. So it really is
That's right.
An initiative that is about getting information and specific information to voters that they need to bank their vote by voting early.
Absolutely. And we're going to continue expanding these initiatives. As you've mentioned, we've rolled it out in multiple languages. We'll continue to do more. And we also, I think it's important to note, have these state leadership teams. So it's not just the website. We also have buy-in and the team effort of leaders across the state. And each state looks a little bit different, and that's because it should. We want this to be tailored specifically to your state at home.
So I was talking with the political director that we have here at the RNC, and he was talking about one of the reasons. So, I have a lot of relatives at home that are like, I vote on Election Day. I don't need to worry about it because I'm going to bank my vote on Election Day. What's the point of voting early? And he made what I thought was a really compelling point, that if you bank your vote as soon as possible, that frees up a ton of resources. So if you're concerned about Democrat spending in your state, if you're concerned about making sure we get those voters that don't vote a lot out, voting early lets us take those resources and target voters that haven't voted, target voters that have voted a few years ago, a few cycles ago, that maybe vote Republican. I thought that was an incredibly compelling reason that it's almost a double bang for your buck in the sense you're voting and then letting us use those resources to go after someone else's vote.
Absolutely, that's right. And it frees up money in the entire Republican ecosystem. You know, it's not just the RNC, it's not just the campaign. This is a team effort. And so you have to be able to reach those low propensity and swing voters. So when Tommy locks in Tommy's vote, Rachel locks in Rachel's vote, we're able to then take those dollars in the ecosystem and go after those that we need to ultimately win on Election Day.
I think that's incredibly compelling in terms of why you need to bank your vote. And we're looking at these numbers from the last election. Democrats have, the last few election cycles, had more early votes come in. But this is an issue that we're already seeing progress in. And a lot of these states, we did see gains in terms of Republicans voting early more often. Is that right?
That's right. And while this initiative has really just started, we hit the ground running. We looked at 2023 as an opportunity to get going ahead of 2024. And for many of these races, that was critical. But of course, we're going to continue expanding our operation on that and the focus on that. And so while we saw gains in requests, in new requests, what we want to look for is continuing that momentum. And that really starts on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis. So we're encouraging you to get involved and get your friends and neighbors to do the same.
And I think it's also great about these state-specific pages in terms of what's already been launched, is that we're talking about traditional battleground states, Wisconsin, we're talking about competitive Senate races in terms of Ohio coming up, but we're also talking about competitive House races. So when someone hears California, New York, despite our massive victories that we had on Tuesday, we're not just, there's competitive House races in these seats as well, which is why it's not just Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, which are incredibly important, but it's also New York, California, and other states as well.
We want to be able to be in every state across the country. So this is a resource that's for everyone. But like you're saying, it's not just the Senate races. It's not just those electoral votes. We're really focusing on those key congressional races. We have to keep the House. And we will be defending several really good members. And we are already investing in that. We're already making gains. And we'll be working every day between now and next November.
I think that's incredibly important, building on that momentum. So many victories on Tuesday, that so much of the media narrative, Democrat narrative, trying to gloss over what are really warning signs for them, claiming that barely holding on to Biden plus 10 districts in Virginia is somehow a victory for the Democrats is absurd to me, but they're doing it. So I'm glad that you were here with all these facts so that we can push back on these Democrats and really with a plan, because it's not just about looking back at these elections and trying to correct the record, which is important, but it's also about taking the lessons learned, victories or places we came up short, and going to 2024.
Of course. I mean, anyone hopefully in life is going to learn from what they've gone through, and we're doing exactly that with these races. We're taking a look at what went well and what could be improved, and that's exactly what we're going to carry with us into 2024. And Bank Your Vote is going to be a critical part of that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for breaking that down. That's bankyourvote.com in terms of going there today. Single best thing you can do, or one of them, to make sure that we beat Joe Biden in 2024. Thank you so much for breaking all that down.
Thank you, Tommy.